Ladies and gentlemen, we just witnessed what might be the most audacious geopolitical chess move of the 21st century. Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev just dropped a bombshell that has sent shockwaves through global markets and defense ministries worldwide. According to breaking reports, Medvedev has stated that if President Trump doesn't move quickly to acquire Greenland, the territory could potentially decide through referendum to join Russia instead. Now, before you dismiss this as typical Russian saber-rattling, let me explain why this statement has the potential to reshape global economics, trigger the largest resource grab in modern history, and fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Arctic. Because what we're looking at here isn't just political theater. This is about $1.5 trillion in untapped natural resources, control of the world's most strategic shipping routes, and a landmass that could determine military dominance for the next century. Greenland isn't just a frozen wasteland covered in ice. It's an 836,000 square mile treasure trove that makes the California gold rush look like pocket change. We're talking about the world's largest untapped deposits of rare earth elements, enough uranium to power every nuclear reactor on Earth for decades, massive oil reserves that could dwarf Saudi Arabia's production, and freshwater resources that will become more valuable than gold as climate change accelerates. But here's what makes Medvedev's statement absolutely terrifying from an economic perspective. Greenland's strategic location gives whoever controls it unprecedented power over global trade routes. As Arctic ice melts due to climate change, new shipping lanes are opening up that cut transit times between Asia and Europe by up to 40%. The Northern Sea Route, which runs along Russia's Arctic coast, could handle up to 25% of global shipping traffic within the next 2 decades. But Greenland sits right at the entrance to these routes like a massive toll booth. Currently, Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, with a population of just 56,000 people. Denmark provides about $600 million annually in subsidies to keep the territory functioning. But here's the kicker that makes Medvedev's referendum threat economically plausible. Greenland has been pushing for independence for years, and they desperately need alternative sources of revenue to replace Danish subsidies. The economic mathematics of this situation are absolutely staggering. Greenland's government has estimated that their mineral resources alone are worth over $1.5 trillion. That includes 25% of the world's rare earth elements, which are essential for everything from smartphones to electric vehicle batteries to military defense systems. China currently controls 90% of rare earth production, giving them enormous leverage over global technology supply chains. Whoever controls Greenland's rare earth deposits could break China's monopoly overnight. The uranium reserves in Greenland are equally mind-blowing. The territory contains an estimated 218,000 tons of uranium, enough to supply global nuclear energy demand for over 40 years at current consumption levels. As the world transitions away from fossil fuels, nuclear energy is becoming increasingly valuable. France gets 75% of its electricity from nuclear power, and countries like Japan and Germany are reconsidering their nuclear phase-outs due to energy security concerns. But the real economic game-changer is Greenland's potential oil and gas reserves. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the Arctic region contains 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of undiscovered natural gas. Much of this is believed to be in Greenland's territorial waters. We're potentially looking at reserves that could rival those of Iraq or Iran. Now let's talk about what Medvedev's referendum threat means for global markets. If Russia somehow gained influence over Greenland through a referendum process, they would essentially control both ends of the Arctic shipping routes. Russia already dominates the Northern Sea Route along their own coastline. Adding Greenland to their sphere of influence would give them the ability to control virtually all Arctic maritime traffic. The implications for shipping and logistics companies are enormous. Companies like Maersk, which handles about 20% of global container shipping, could face completely altered economics if Russia controlled both major Arctic routes. Shipping costs between Asia and Europe could either plummet due to shorter routes or skyrocket if Russia decides to impose heavy transit fees or restrict access for geopolitical reasons. The defense industry is already pricing in massive implications from Medvedev's statement. Greenland's location makes it arguably the most strategically important piece of real estate on Earth for military purposes. The island sits directly between North America and Europe, making it a perfect location for early warning systems, missile defense installations, and military bases that could project power across the entire Arctic region. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and other defense contractors are likely seeing dollar signs right now. If the United States decides to accelerate efforts to secure Greenland, either through purchase or increased military presence, we're looking at potentially hundreds of billions in defense spending. The existing Thule Air Base in Greenland is already one of America's most important military installations, hosting ballistic missile early warning systems and space surveillance equipment. But here's where it gets really interesting from a market perspective. The rare earth element angle could trigger the biggest resource rush since the discovery of oil. Currently, the global rare earth market is worth about $7 billion annually, but it's absolutely critical for modern technology. Tesla needs rare earth elements for their electric vehicle motors. Apple needs them for iPhone components. The Pentagon needs them for guided missiles and advanced radar systems. If Greenland's rare earth reserves came under Russian influence, it would give Moscow unprecedented leverage over global technology supply chains. They could potentially cut off rare earth supplies to Western countries during geopolitical conflicts, crippling everything from renewable energy projects to military production. The strategic implications are so severe that rare earth mining companies are already seeing increased investor interest just from Medvedev's statement. Mining giant Rio Tinto has been eyeing Greenland's mineral wealth for years, but environmental concerns and complex permitting processes have slowed development. If geopolitical competition heats up over Greenland's resources, we could see environmental regulations relaxed and mining projects fast-tracked. Companies with existing interest in Greenland, like Australia's Greenland Minerals, could see their valuations explode overnight. The energy markets are also pricing in potential disruption. If Russia gained influence over Greenland, they would control an enormous percentage of global energy resources. Russia already supplies about 40% of Europe's natural gas imports. Adding Greenland's potential oil and gas reserves to their portfolio would give them even more leverage over global energy prices. European energy companies like Shell, BP, and Total have all invested heavily in Arctic exploration, including areas around Greenland. A Russian sphere of influence over the territory could either shut them out completely or force them into disadvantageous partnerships with Russian energy companies like Gazprom and Rosneft. The agricultural implications are equally staggering, though they're getting less attention in the immediate market reaction. Greenland contains some of the world's largest freshwater reserves, locked up in ice sheets. As global freshwater becomes increasingly scarce due to climate change and population growth, these reserves could become more valuable than oil. Companies involved in water management and agricultural technology could see massive opportunities if Greenland's freshwater resources become accessible. Currency markets are already showing volatility as traders try to price in the geopolitical implications. The Danish krone has seen unusual trading volume as investors speculate about the economic impact on Denmark if they were to lose Greenland. The Russian ruble has strengthened slightly on speculation that Russia could gain access to massive new resource wealth. But perhaps the most significant economic implication involves the broader shift toward resource nationalism and great power competition. Medvedev's statement signals that Russia is willing to compete directly with the United States for control of strategic resources and territory. This represents a fundamental shift away from the globalized economic order that has dominated since the end of the Cold War. If major powers start competing directly for control of resource-rich territories, it could trigger a new era of economic blocs and resource hoarding. Countries might start prioritizing resource security over economic efficiency, leading to higher prices for commodities and more volatile supply chains. The technology sector is particularly vulnerable to this shift. Silicon Valley companies have built their business models on the assumption that they can access raw materials from anywhere in the world at competitive prices. If geopolitical competition leads to resource hoarding and supply chain weaponization, tech companies could face dramatically higher input costs and supply disruptions. For investors, Medvedev's statement represents both enormous opportunity and significant risk. Companies positioned to benefit from Arctic resource development could see massive gains. Mining companies, shipping firms, defense contractors, and energy companies with Arctic exposure are all potential winners. On the flip side, companies that depend on stable global supply chains and predictable resource prices could face serious challenges. The automotive industry, electronics manufacturers, and renewable energy companies all rely heavily on rare earth elements and other resources that could become geopolitical weapons. The infrastructure implications are equally massive. If Arctic shipping routes become major commercial corridors, we'll need enormous investments in ports, icebreaker ships, navigation systems, and search and rescue capabilities. Companies involved in Arctic infrastructure development could see unprecedented opportunities. But there's also a darker economic scenario to consider. If competition over Greenland escalates into a broader confrontation between Russia and the West, we could see economic sanctions, trade disruptions, and market volatility that makes the 2022 Ukraine crisis look mild by comparison. Russian control or influence over Greenland would give Moscow leverage over Western economies that they've never had before. The timeline for any potential referendum or geopolitical action around Greenland remains unclear, but the economic implications are already being priced into markets. Commodities traders are watching rare earth prices closely. Defense stocks are seeing increased activity. Arctic shipping companies are attracting new investor interest. What makes this situation particularly unpredictable is that it involves not just major powers like Russia and the United States, but also smaller players like Denmark and Greenland itself. The Greenlandic government has been clear about their desire for greater autonomy and economic independence. If they see an opportunity to achieve those goals through closer ties with Russia or through a bidding war between major powers, they might take it. The environmental considerations add another layer of complexity to the economic calculations. Greenland's ice sheet contains enough water to raise global sea levels by over 20 feet if it melted completely. Climate change is already accelerating ice loss in Greenland, making the territory's mineral resources more accessible, while also raising questions about the environmental costs of resource extraction. Companies involved in climate change mitigation and adaptation could see new opportunities if Greenland becomes a major focus of international attention. Carbon capture technology, renewable energy infrastructure, and environmental monitoring systems could all see increased demand. The bottom line is that Medvedev's statement about a potential Greenland referendum has highlighted one of the most significant economic and strategic competitions of our time. Whether through purchase, political influence, or military positioning, major powers are going to compete for control over Greenland's resources and strategic location. For global markets, this competition represents a fundamental shift toward resource nationalism and great power rivalry. Companies and investors who understand these trends and position accordingly could benefit enormously. Those who ignore the geopolitical dimensions of global economics could find themselves on the wrong side of history. The specific market sectors most impacted by this Greenland competition deserve detailed analysis. The shipping industry faces a complete paradigm shift if Arctic routes become commercially viable under Russian influence. Companies like FedEx and UPS could see route economics completely altered. Currently, cargo ships from Shanghai to Hamburg take 35 days through Suez Canal. Arctic route could cut that to 23 days, representing billions in fuel savings. But here's the catch. If Russia gains influence over both route ends, they could impose transit fees, eliminating cost savings. Russian state shipping company Sovcomflot could dominate Arctic shipping, squeezing out Western competitors through preferential pricing. Commodity exchanges already show increased volatility in rare earth futures. CME reports unusual trading volume in neodymium and dysprosium contracts, critical for wind turbines and electric vehicles. Russian influence over Greenland's rare earth deposits could manipulate global prices during geopolitical conflicts. Renewable energy faces acute risks. Wind manufacturers like GE and Siemens depend on rare earth magnets. Solar production requires materials that could become weapons in resource war. Tesla's gigafactories could face production disruptions if supplies become unreliable. Central banks watch carefully as this represents potential shifts in reserve currency dynamics. If Russia gains Greenland resources, they could push ruble-denominated commodity sales, similar to current oil-gas efforts with friendly countries. Defense contractors are mobilizing around Greenland competition. Boeing and Lockheed developing Arctic patrol aircraft and missile defense systems. Northrop Grumman's polar satellites could see increased demand. Investment winners include companies with Arctic expertise. Norwegian shipping company TK has specialized vessels that could become extremely valuable. Canadian mining companies with cold weather experience could see high demand. Losers include companies dependent on stable supply chains. Electronics manufacturers, automotive, and renewable energy firms could see dramatically higher input costs. Apple, Samsung could face component shortages if rare earths become politicized. Banking firms position for opportunities. If Greenland gains autonomy, it needs sophisticated financial services for resource revenues. Investment banks could compete for commodity deals and infrastructure financing mandates. Pharmaceutical industry has surprising stakes through ancient microorganisms in ice sheets that could source new antibiotics. Russian control could limit Western access to potentially life-saving discoveries. Space technology companies watch due to Greenland's satellite communications importance. Location makes it ideal for polar orbit tracking. SpaceX and operators could face restricted facility access under Russian influence. Looking at specific plays, rare earth miners like Australia's Lynas and MP Materials could see valuations increase as West seeks supply alternatives. Defense ETFs could outperform from increased Arctic military spending. Conversely, companies dependent on Chinese supply chains face headwinds. Consumer electronics and automotive manufacturers could see margin pressure if forced to diversify suppliers. The race for Greenland has begun, and the winner will reshape the global economy for generations to come. The implications extend far beyond simple resource extraction to fundamental questions about economic sovereignty, supply chain security, and the future of great power competition. Investors who understand these dynamics and position accordingly could benefit from one of the most significant geopolitical realignments since World War II.